This is the first interview of a new interview project for which I will be interviewing people just for fun. Anyways, our guest today is Reid Williamson, a man who was on the original Jeopardy in 1972. Welcome, Reid.
Hi.
Okay, so what we will mostly be discussing here today is your appearance on Jeopardy, among other things. But I think a good way to start this talk would be just for you to give some short words about yourself. A brief introduction, I think, is a nice idea. So, your name, age, something like that.
Okay. You can guess from the fact that I was on Jeopardy 53 years ago that I am not just 27 years old. I'm over 75 because I was about, what was I, 24 on the show back in October of 72. I lived at the time in Delaware, so I was very happy when the show was broadcast to hear them say, when they announced me and the next contestant, because I was not the host at the beginning. The next contestant is Reid Williamson of Laurel, Delaware, which was my hometown at the time. And they didn't have a lot of contestants from Delaware. I don't think they do now either. So I was happy to do that. But I live in Richmond, Virginia now.
Well, that's certainly an experience. And of course, yes, you were the second contestant to come on. I believe the first contestant, I don't remember, but it was your first game was Lynn, you, and
Pro
Ellen. Yes.
and
And
Ellen
yes,
Poliani.
that was 53 years ago. And of course, it's appropriately fitting that the show is almost 61, as that's the number of answers that is in a typical game. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous here,
So it
but
is. Yeah. Yeah, it was quite an experience for me. I was, of course, glad to have gotten on the show because it was a chance to play games and possibly receive money, which I then did. I mean, I got money for being on the show, and Uncle Sam did not take any taxes out until paid the next year. They didn't withhold any, so I got a check for the whole amount. And if there's a major regret from that show, it is that I did not make a photocopy of the check. I don't have that souvenir. I have the video showing me on the show, but I don't have the video photo of the check.
well, as we're beginning to discuss this, I think, of course, the video is probably a far more respectable souvenir from that time, considering only a dozen or so episodes from that era exist because of NBC's tape wiping practices from the time.
When I contacted the Museum of Television and Radio in New York about whether they wanted a copy of my DVD, what they said, among other things, was they did have a few episodes, as you say, but none of them was consecutive. And mine were, of course, five in a row. I was an undefeated champion, and that was the max that NBC allowed at the time. So, yes, they did want the DVD, which, as you know, they now have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course, you were the 97th undefeated champion of about 100 or so of that era. That rule lasted until, of course, 2003, and now that's gone, allowing a champion to win as many times as they want. Um,
Yeah.
you won $4,560, and of course, that was worth a lot more than it is now.
It was about a half a year's income for people. I got a job a year or so later. I was in graduate school at the time, so income was spotty. I had a university fellowship that paid most of my university costs, my graduate school costs, but I didn't have an actual regular income. I had summer jobs that were just a little bit above minimum wage, and this was therefore a very nice supplement to
Yeah.
my sort of acceptable minimum income. I wasn't going to make a good living as a park ranger, but it was a job that kept me housed and fed for the time being. Oh.
Yeah. I have another question to ask, but first I do want to ask about concerning the money. What did you do with that $4,560?
Part of it was, in fact, taking, as I said in one of the episodes, a trip to California. I had never been. I'm East Coast person. I've never lived on the West Coast, but I love travel, period. And that enabled me to feel comfortable about, even though I was generally unemployed, to feel comfortable about taking a cross-country road trip because I do not prefer to fly. I prefer to drive. So I was on the road from Delaware to the West Coast where I had cousins. I had friends in Los Angeles and I had cousins in San Francisco, Marin County, and I believe, yes, a friend in Bellingham, Washington, and friends in Idaho. So I had some people to see, but there were also, of course, national parks and uh, just other famous sites along the way. So I was gone about 7 weeks. And I would write home and I would, I think, probably telephone to my parents and a couple of times. But I mostly was just on the road in my little green Volkswagen Bug and seeing sights and visiting family out west and so on. It was just a way to spend some of the money. The rest of it was maintenance until I got another job, until I got a real job, I guess I should say.
Well, thanks for answering that. And of course, I'm pretty nervous here, you can tell. I'm just trying to get through the questions as quickly as possible. My other question was, oh, let's move on just for a second, because you mentioned you went on a trip to California. Excuse me for mentioning the emails I sent to you a while ago, but you mentioned you visited San Francisco at one point, and of course, on the fourth game, there was a contestant, Hathaway Watson. Um, can you tell us that story a bit? Because I know I sent it to you. You told me a while ago, but can you reiterate that perhaps?
When he was there on the show, he was relatively friendly, and I'll say this because I have no idea what happened to the other guy who was distinctly unfriendly. And I did beat both of them because I won yet another game. But Hathaway Watson, having heard me say that I wanted to visit California, said something about if I was in the area. He lived, I'm not sure whether he lived in the city or in a suburb, but he said, uh, give him a call if I had time. Well, I forgot the information that he gave me. I didn't have it with me. And you couldn't just Google people in 1972. So I didn't ever hear from, he didn't hear from me. So that was that.
Well, I mean that it still must have been a fun experience for you to go traveling like that, and I've seen you travel quite a bit. I can see I've seen from some of your photos that you have posted. You,
I've been to
you
every county in the United States. That's a project I worked on for 45 years or so because I figured I want to see the country. And if I make sure I go to every county, I will see more of it on the ground. Obviously, you can fly over to California and you can see the Rockies and you can see Kansas and be pretty sure it's flat and so on. But I drove up and back and around and about and over the years went to every county. I've been in every county in the lower 48 states twice because that was the new millennium. So I've done a lot of ground sightseeing and I will continue to as long as I'm healthy because that's something I really like to do by car. I really don't feel comfortable flying.
Most definitely. I think that is certainly very admirable. On that topic, I do want to mention mostly we're going to be discussing Jeopardy in this allotted time
Sure.
frame, but I do want to ask another question, or at
Sure.
least mention your church website, your photographing of every church in every colonial church in all the 13 original colonies. I believe that's the
Strictly
purpose of.
speaking, it's in 17 states because in the colonial era, Maine was part of Massachusetts, but is a separate state. And Vermont was part of New Hampshire and New York, who were disputing it,
And West
but it's a
Virginia.
separate state. And West Virginia was part of Virginia. So that's three more, plus the District of Columbia. So actually, there's 17 jurisdictions that
So
have
the
these
old, oh, so,
colonial
so
houses of worship that I've been looking for and finding and photographing. And there's a website for them to keep track and if people want to look at the pictures and read a little bit about them too.
yeah. So basically the old colonial area, yes.
Yes, from Maine to Georgia and up and back, and I live in the middle of it, so it's been easy enough to get to one end or the other over the years. And I think I now have seen all of them. It's a continuing process because just last summer I found two more that I'd never heard of, and I've been doing this for about 25 years. So I was kind of surprised because I thought I had seen all of them. I love the colonial era. I went to a college which was older than the colonial, well, founded in the colonial era, William and Mary, And I love the atmosphere of Williamsburg, Virginia. I live in Richmond, so I can go there fairly often. It's something I love to do. And the colonial churches are part of that. I love being in the churchyard or going inside the church and enjoying the atmosphere of 250 years ago or thereabouts. It's a very peaceful sensation.
Well, I certainly can tell that. I'm going to move on to another thing from this in a second, but I do want to add, well, or at least comment on. I remember in one of your episodes you mentioned you were studying at college medieval history, was it? And I just
Yes.
wanted to say that must be a real fun thing for you if you went to study I mean medieval history rather, for you to photograph all those churches.
Yes, obviously there's nothing medieval in the United States except what has been brought to museums around the country. But I studied medieval history because that is a period I've always been fascinated with since I was a little kid, reading about Robin Hood, and that's semi-fictional, but it's a real period in English history and French history and so on. And my advisor at William and Mary was a specialist in medieval history who encouraged me, but pointed out that if I didn't get a doctorate, I had no hope of having a teaching job in a university, and I didn't have the gumption. So that's fine. I had a different life, and I've enjoyed the medieval history knowledge. And when I've been able to go to Europe, I've been able to see castles that I had read about, or ones that were totally new to me, as the case may be. But it has certainly enhanced my enjoyment of travel in Europe uh, to have had that background.
Uh, well, certainly, I can see that would definitely be a lot of fun for you, and of course, you just described that. On that topic, before I get to this next point, I guess what would be your favorite church or bit of history you have seen in Europe? Because I've seen like some photos of that, but what would you say?
I'm an Anglophile, so I've loved going to England, and there are so many places in England that I have really loved visiting. I'm not sure I could say, except that I was born in Salisbury, Maryland, which was back in the 30s, celebrating its 200th anniversary as a city in Maryland. And they invited people from Salisbury, England, which of course is the city they were named for. So the Lord Mayor of Salisbury, England, came to Salisbury, Maryland in 1932, and there was stuff I knew growing up about Salisbury. Well, it turns out it has a spectacularly beautiful cathedral with the tallest spire in England and wonderful grounds. And so that might be the single most favorite place anywhere in England. But there are lots and lots of places in England that I love, that I have visited, that I've been to England and Britain more than 25 times.
Well, I certainly would like to visit Britain myself someday, and I'm sure I will, but that's a nice anecdote, and probably my favorite thing about the UK would probably just be actually, I'm probably not sure. Sorry about that, but
That's
I
okay.
can't name it in a few seconds. This is just just a fast sort of thing. But I'll just get on to the thing I'm going to mention. On the topic of William and Mary, besides Jeopardy, I did also see a picture in which you participated in College Bowl, which was one of those, well, another intelligent show that back in the era. And
It was a quiz show that I can't remember the network to tell you the truth, because when I was on College Bowl, my parents we did not have a television. So we knew about it. And I was in college, and William and Mary had tryouts, and I tried out and I made the team. So I was able to be on the show. We went to New York, and it was filmed, I think, in the NBC studio. So it may have been an NBC show. But in any case, that was a 1 day thing, because if you won, you'd come back the next week, and we didn't win because Columbia was all powerful at the time. That I think they won 5 in a row. But in any case, that was not my first quiz show. I was on a quiz show in high school, and I don't have any photos from that. Our local TV station ran a show that was, I guess, inspired by College Bowl. It seemed to have a similar format. But again, we didn't have a television when I was a teenager, so I didn't see College Bowl. I didn't see Jeopardy when it was first on. We got a TV when I was 20 years old, and I was watching Jeopardy nonstop after that. But
yeah.
these quiz shows were fun because I like trivia and I like to recall things, and that was part of it. But of course, I didn't make any money off the first two shows because they were based on those two schools my high school and then William and Marion. I have a souvenir from the College Bowl, but I don't have anything from the high school thing except the memories.
Well, the memories can certainly be important too, though.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And you have a lot of them, considering it's been a long, long time since back then.
Yeah.
Certainly, I don't mean to give any implications of insult, but
Oh, I joke about it. To people I meet in the museum or whatever. I'm a geezer, and I might as well take advantage of it.
another thing before we get back to Jeopardy, because of course, well, actually, before that, I want to just ask, it was the General Electric College Bowl. Was it with Alan Ludden?
No, he had moved on to Password by the time I was on College Bowl. It was a man named Robert Earl, not Best, Robert Earl, Earle. And the story we heard while we were in New York was that he got the job because he did an audition tape and he looked a little bit like Alan Ludden and he sounded very much like Alan Ludden. So they gave him the job and he was very good and it was very personable and all that. But we were there taping it on Sunday. And the significance for me is I've never seen that because we flew home and we were in the air, couldn't see the show. So didn't I never saw it. And given that we didn't do very well, I'm okay with that, I guess.
You have a picture of it, though, of course.
They took a picture in the studio of the four of us on our team sitting in our desks. And by the way, I don't know, you know this because you watch the old Jeopardy episodes. My mother was furious when the new Jeopardy started that the people had to stand for the whole 30 minutes instead of being allowed to sit down. Because we all came in and we sat down and we sat there for the whole time. And now Alex and whoever has
Ken
made the
Jennings.
rules about the new show says, well, unless you're handicapped, you're going to be standing. And my mother didn't like that. And since I have a bad back, I wouldn't like it now, but it didn't bother me the way it bothered her. Sorry.
Oh, well, I shouldn't say Ken Jennings because he's the current host. Whoever, I mean, you were talking about like who started producing the new series. Of course,
In 84
Alex
when
was a
it came on the air, whether it was Michael Richards or Alex Trebek or Merv Griffin saying they got to stand, no sitting. I don't know. It's just the way they are. They stand now, except for handicapped people.
well, I don't want to get on too much of a tangent about this, but I do believe, of course, Alex was a producer of the show for 3 years, for the first 3 years of the current version. And I think part of that might be because they were trying to get the Jeopardy back on, because of course, as you know, it went off the air in 75, returned briefly. I don't know, do you know that it returned briefly in 78 and 79?
But I was moving to Europe, so I didn't see it.
But you do know that it returned in 78, because I know a lot of people don't probably know that it returned in 78 and 79 with Art Fleming and was a huge failure. So I don't
Yeah,
think a lot of people probably know that. And those who do agree with the general consensus that the brief revival was a failure.
yeah,
When they were, I think most of what they were trying to do was make sure that the new Jeopardy would be a success. And I don't know how much standing would play into that, but I guess they wanted to make the set brighter, new
yeah.
rules, and of course, new production company. One of the things that, since I'm such a big fan of Art Fleming, is that there's a bit of a discussion on how Alex was picked as the host, and one of the ideas was that I'm not going to get on too much of a tangent with this, but that Art was either whether Art was considered as a host and he turned it down, or the production company chose Alex as a host because they thought Art was too old or something.
Well, he was certainly getting on at that point. He was not young when I was on, really.
Well, he was 40 when
48 or 55 or something. I don't know.
he was 40 when he first started the show, so
So he was in his late 40s when I was on, or mid 40s, I guess.
well, almost 50, yes.
But I was young, so he seemed old, the way I seem really ancient to you now.
You don't seem all that ancient to me. I don't judge people by their age.
No, but I joke about it a lot because
Yeah.
what else am I going to do?
I really appreciate a lot of these stories that old people can tell because it really can help you learn a lot about our world and about things that have happened in the past. I know I used to talk a lot with my grandparents and just play a lot of games with them. I mean, they're the reason why I watched Jeopardy in the first place. Um, Watched it with them for many years. And I think we're going to get off this tangent, of course, now, but I think back to Jeopardy, of course. I forget where I was going with this, but uh, so referring back to the two people you said were unfriendly, I think that was the second game, was it? Stu and
I didn't think of Stu as particularly unfriendly so much as unfortunate. He just was having a lot of difficulties with that show. He didn't do
well,
very
he ended
well
up
at all.
minus, of course, yeah.
Yeah, very, very much minus. And of course, they changed one thing, and my mother and I, and a couple of other aficionados in the 80s noticed in those days, I mean, Stu had to sit there while we were playing. They didn't have him leave during the commercial break before Final Jeopardy. So that was kind of awkward for him because he's sitting there not participating. Now the person, anyone in minus, is gone, and they're maybe off stage. I mean, they're off stage somewhere, but they don't have to sit there being a non-participant while being on camera. And so I think that's an improvement. But Stu was not unfriendly, and just, you're there for 35 or 45 minutes. They filmed it, taped it in real time, but you're there before it starts, and you're there for a few minutes or several minutes afterwards. They were conversational, but Alex on the fourth game was distinctly isolationist, or he just was very chilly to try to talk to, and so that's that. But
Oh, it was Alex? You mean the fifth game? The fifth game?
was it the fifth? I
I
thought it
think
was the
Alex
fourth
was on
game.
the fifth game, and not
You
Alex
see, you've
Trebek,
looked at
everyone,
it
of
more
course.
recently than I have, so yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Well, I saw your shows in October, so remember a lot of things. I know probably the order some of the contestants were on. I have the distinct quality of when I get a special interest, I focus on it intensely, and
Hmm.
I've watched every single existing episode that I know of the original Jeopardy, every single clip, except those that are not accessible.
Yeah. You're right. I'm recalling it now. I would have trouble coming up with everybody for every day. But for instance, there was a woman named, I've forgotten her first name, Fitzgerald from Memphis. She had just moved there. Her husband worked for AP, I think. And she was very funny to talk to. But Frances Fitzgerald, maybe, I'm not sure. But in any case, she was not the last day. But Alex and Hathaway were the last day.
Well, I wrote a little review of seeing your shows on Reddit back when I saw them in October, and I can probably pull up the names for you later, but I'm not going to mention it now.
Well, I can
And
play the DVD and find them too, because I have a
you have
copy
the
myself.
DVD? You have the
I have
DVD?
a copy of the DVD. Yeah,
And you sent another copy to the Paley Center.
yeah. And I gave some to some of my older friends that I thought might like to have one, and they watched, I guess. I mean, I don't sit there and watch it with everybody, but I have seen it over the years a few times.
I'm trying to remember what I was gonna say a second ago. Oh, and I didn't. Yes. I just made a little joke a second ago when you mentioned Alex from the last show, and I just said, not Alex Trebek, everyone.
No, you're right. Not Alex Trebek, who was old enough to have been on that show because he was older than I was, but
He did
I am.
appear
But
for. Oh, sorry to interrupt you, but
no, no, no.
he did appear on one of the shows in '74. He appeared to promote his show Wizard of Odds, and of course
That's right.
the show no longer exists, but he did make an appearance, and he also played a game with Art Fleming, I believe. There's enough
Ah,
records of the show that we know this stuff, but
right, right.
of course the shows are gone because tape was heavy at that time, and again they had tape wiping practices.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get through all these questions here, so I'll just finish up the questions here. Of course, you still watch the show today, of course?
I run my DVR and I let sometimes I let several build up because I'm out of town or whatever, and other times I watch it later that night. But in fact, I'm not very patient with commercials, so I never watch it live. I always record it and then speed through the commercials. That's just my way.
And of course, another thing is, I guess, just out of curiosity, do you think you could win on the modern version? Just out of curiosity.
Not a chance.
Yeah.
The technology is different in two different ways. In the old days, you're seeing the screen, they not the cardboard, and they've lifted the dollar value, and you can see the answer. You were allowed to ring in as soon as you thought you could answer.
As soon as the
That's
answer was
one difference.
exposed.
You have to wait until your buzzer is unlocked now. So even if you read it very quickly nowadays, you can't ring in until the moderator, Jennings or Alex Trebek or whoever, stops talking and they unlock the freezer, the buzzers. Well, that's a different kind of being quick on the buzzer than the manual buzzers that we had. And we could ring in while Art Fleming was still talking. And then our light would come on and we would be the one selected.
Yeah.
I could be very quick with the ones that I was sure of back then. I could be very quick now, but I couldn't ring in. And it's the ringing in that I cannot, don't think that I would be able to beat the timing of he stopped talking, buzz in now. I see them, and some of them are really good at it. Obviously, that James Holzhauer, oh, very quick. And obviously, Ken was getting lots of stuff right, and he was quick too.
Uh,
No, I
yeah.
couldn't win now. I know stuff, and then there's stuff I don't know, and there's modern music. I know nothing of that. Modern business, I don't know that stuff. So there's larger numbers of things. The number of presidents has not increased a lot. I know the presidential names, the presidential spouses, most of their, maybe all of their birthplaces. Presidential facts are something they ask about over and over again. But pop music, there is just way more than there was 52 years ago. So the enormous volume of that has changed so much more than, say, the number of elements, the chemical elements. There have been some developed and some discovered, but nowhere near the increase compared to the number of car brands. So there's loads of categories I would just not be very good at now. I was very lucky back then. It was my kind of stuff.
Well, and of course, you know that the difficulty of the answers has definitely increased because of the internet and all, because you can just click something online and get information like that. It's not like back in the 70s where you had to go to an encyclopedia and even that wouldn't give you everything.
Right,
And of
right.
course, the original Jeopardy was, for its first couple of years, well, for all of its years, the answers were retrieved from encyclopedias. So a limited amount of Big's amounts of knowledge.
Yeah,
And,
exactly.
and of course, I know you mentioned at one point in one of my messages to you that you at one point had the sixth edition of the game, but of course, the mandatory prizes for all contestants were the current edition of the encyclopedia sponsor and that current edition of the Jeopardy game. So you would have gotten the eighth edition as well, because that
I
was
probably
1972.
did, but I gave one of them to the friend who persuaded me I should try out for the show. And
That
I
was
guess
the
he
sixth
and
version, probably.
I don't know which one it was, and I don't have either one anymore.
Hmm. I'm going on a personal mission to collect every single home game from that era, because of course this is my current special interest. And
Right. Yeah.
another thing, we'll just go back to the new version for a second, and of course, I think it's because I mean, if you've been watching recently, then of course there's been a Fleming contestant who was in the Tournament of Champions, and uh, it's good to know where your abilities are, I suppose.
Yes, I remember seeing that person, and I will tell you in the 80s, late 80s or very early 90s, I inquired, I guess by mail, not by phone call, whether I'd be allowed on the show, which I was not very enthusiastic about trying to do because I live in Virginia and it's in California. and making a trip out there on the off chance I could be on the show was an expensive and chancy proposition. So I wrote them, and they said, no, if you were on the earlier show, you're not allowed on this show. They apparently changed that rule later because I've heard of at least two or maybe three people who were on the Art Fleming Jeopardy and years later were on the Alex Trebek Jeopardy or the Ken Jennings Jeopardy. So they changed it, but I'm still not going to go out there to be on the show because I'm too slow. I'm too old.
I
That's
mean,
just my view.
again, I'm having a hard problem with stuttering here. I do that a lot, but um, we only have a little time for a couple more questions. But again, it's good to know where your abilities are and what you're able and not able to do. Um, since we only have time for a couple more questions, I'm just going to rattle out a few other things that might be um, good to know.
Go ahead.
You of
Yeah,
course you applied for the show in 71, I believe. You
yeah,
told me before.
yeah.
And can you just tell what the process was back then?
I forget whether it said on the screen, like at the end of the show, but somehow I learned the address to write and find out what I needed to do. And they said, come into the studio. And of course, in those days, there were no road trips where they were seeking out contestants. You had to go to New York, to the NBC studios, and take a test, which was two parts. One part was, I think, 50 written questions just to get like all kinds of topics to get the idea whether you, the contestant, the potential contestant, knew stuff. So, okay, you fill that out, and then they didn't ever tell me or anybody else that I heard of their score. But they were tough, and there were a lot of things that I knew, and then there were some that I didn't even know what they were talking about. You fill that out, and you had X amount of time, but it was not a timed test where move to the next question, you just had like an hour to fill out
Not
all
like an
50.
ACT.
Right. So then you're done with that. And the next part was small groups of three or four with but little hand clickers. And they would hold up cards. They were face down. They would hold up a card and you would click to ring in, as it were, to say that you could, and then you would phrase your question. And they told us the purpose of that part of it was not the information per se, but rather basically, are you going to sit there like a bump on a log or are you going to speak up? Because we want lively contestants. We don't want everybody to be wrong, but we don't want everybody to be silent either. And so apparently I did all right in both parts. So, okay, thank you for coming. Goodbye. Oh, they did tell you the guidelines. If you don't make it, we will notify you very shortly. You will get a letter in the mail that you did not make it. If you do not hear from us, it means we will want you for a show and we will be in touch sometime. Well, it was 10 months, 11 months later, and I was finishing up in grad school in Connecticut. And I wrote to them and said, I'm thinking of moving to California. Um, I live near New York now. It was Delaware, but it was close enough. Is there any chance you're going to call me before I move to California? It'd be much cheaper. They telephoned me, I guess the day they got the letter, and asked if I could come up that week. So I went to New York and checked into a hotel, which was not too far from Rockefeller Center, and went and was on the show. And they taped three at a time at that time. They did six shows a week. In other words, three on Thursday, three on Friday. And so they moved a little bit ahead of the year-round schedule so that they could all then take a vacation when they had built up enough to run a couple weeks worth of shows without taping any more shows. So I was on the second show on Thursday, and then I was on the next one, and then the three the next day. That was my five, and it meant I went home with knowing I was going to get a check in the mail at some point, and I did. And the encyclopedia arrived, and I donated it to the school. And the game, I think they gave me the game while I was there, so I took it away with me. But in any case, it was all taped in one 2 day session. And then I was told not to tell anybody the outcome. So I did, in fact, not tell anybody except my parents. I didn't tell neighbors. I didn't tell the newspaper in town, which ran an article, and they wanted to know. And I said, NBC has asked me not to say the outcome, though, of course, anybody who was watching my schedule could have said, well, he was in New York for multiple days. He must have won more than one because he was there and they would have been right, but I didn't confirm it. So that was how it was all done in 72.
I would love to ask a lot more questions here, but we're quite near out of time, so I'm just going to ask one more question because, of course, 5 day champions, even now, qualify for the Tournament of Champions. And, of course, you, as the 97th champion, just want to ask I already know, but how did you do on the 1973 Tournament of Champions?
I did not do very well because I followed their guidelines where they said, well, we don't like to have ties, so make sure your bets work out so that you won't tie either of the other two contestants. And I bet an amount, and I don't remember the exact dollars now, it was like in the 130, 150, and I was wrong. And so they took off like 25 or something. And so I was $5 behind the winner. Whereas if I had taken off the 20 that I was planning on doing, I would have been tied and they would have had to figure out a tiebreaker. So if I hadn't, I might have gotten the next question right. But water over the dam, I didn't win and she did. I've
Yeah.
never held a grudge. I've carefully not held a grudge. I haven't tracked her down and tried to get the $130 away from her. I'm just kidding.
No, no, I understand you. And of course, I think part of that is because, of course, back in the day, up until 2014 on the current version, if you tied for first place, they allowed co-champions. And of course,
Yeah,
there's a tiebreaker now that they give an extra question if you tie for first place. But
I've seen that.
I
Yeah.
think the situation for that is because I apparently learned there was a tie on one of the 1971 Tournament of Champions games, I believe.
Oh,
And I think they didn't want that to happen again because they had to figure out this whole convoluted thing. Because instead of doing a tiebreaker, they just wanted, oh, we're not going to change it so that would not be fair. Like, we'll have you both be co-champions, but we'll figure out this whole convoluted thing. And then when it was done, I would figure they probably didn't want to have it to happen again.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I certainly have had a lot of fun things to say, and you have had a lot of fun things to say. I would certainly like to say a lot more, but we are quite near out of time. So I thank you so very much for talking here. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and
Yes.
that
Yeah.
is the interview. So thank you for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jonas.
Reid Williamson has been our guest, and he's had a lot of things to say. It's been a nice mem
Memorable? No?
memorable time. Thank you. Time, and see you all next Friday, people. Thank you very much. Oh boy.